Welcome to Self-Care for Educators Part 2. We're excited that you're joining us once again to build on your learning from Part 1 and start considering how your self-care can have a positive impact on the self-care of those around you. This video will provide you with an overview of both the course logistics and course content. Take a moment to review the outcomes for this course and consider what questions you might have. You're here because you've completed Self-Care for Educators Part 1, where you had the chance to focus on your own self-care through multiple strategies and to consider how you might use these strategies with your students. But the more research we did around self-care, the more we started to realize that paying attention to and taking steps to improve individual self-care is only half the battle. In order to truly maximize your self-care, we have to widen the lens and look at the culture of self-care around us, and, where we can, help others help themselves. Emily and Amelia Nagoski, authors of Burnout: The Secret to Unlocking the Stress Cycle, tell us that the cure for burnout isn't and can't be self-care. It has to be all of us caring for each other. So while your self-care is a piece, and a really vital one, it's not the whole puzzle. To that end, throughout this course, we're going to be dipping back into your individual self-care, while also thinking more broadly about how you might use your sphere of influence to impact a culture of self-care on a team, a department, or even a school, for the benefit of all. Let's start with a brief overview of the course. In Week 1, we'll look at the power of influence and ask ourselves, how do we use our spheres of influence to impact others' behaviors? In Week 2, we'll focus on self-awareness and ask, how does knowing ourselves deeply support our own self-care and impact the self-care of others? In Week 3, we'll define a culture of self-care and ask, what does it mean to be part of a culture of self-care? In Week 4, we'll move past definition and think about creating a culture of self-care, asking, how do we lead with compassion for ourselves and for others? And finally, in Week 5, we'll look at how we sustain self-care and ask, what are your goals and next steps in leading this charge? Let's shift now to course logistics. Much like Self-Care for Educators Part 1, this course includes 5 2-hour synchronous sessions that you will attend through Zoom. During those sessions, you'll engage in learning that builds on the asynchronous work, and you'll have opportunities to collaborate and reflect with colleagues in both home groups and random groups. The course also includes asynchronous work. You will be asked to complete 4 hours of asynchronous assignments prior to each synchronous session. In Part 2, each week's assignments are set up as one individual module and one 5 to try. More on that in a moment. Like in Part 1, you'll submit assignments via Google Classroom before the due date. For this course, we're trying something new within the asynchronous work, and we've called it 5 to try. In 5 to Try, we've provided 4 resources around that week's topics, plus 1 wildcard if you'd like to include a resource of your own. Once you have read, viewed, or listened to your resources, you will reflect on your learning and start leveraging your influence. So what does this mean? Consider how you might share your learning from each resource within your sphere of influence. This might include sharing it on social media, asking colleagues to engage with and debrief on it with you, synthesizing and sharing highlights with your team, or any other way that makes sense to you within your sphere of influence. Thank you for joining us once again as we continue on this self-care journey. We look forward to seeing you at our first session and working with you throughout this course.